You're now listening to the Boys in the Booth podcast with your hosts, Harper Cody, Chad Melbourne, and Casey Abrams. New episodes every Monday on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
Good evening and welcome to episode 117 of the Boys in the Booth podcast. Cody, Abrams, and Melbourne. It's great to be chatting with you after a week off. I know it is exam season for you right now, Chad. Trade deadline, only a couple of weeks away, but we're not going to be talking about that. Before we get into what we're going to be chatting about this episode, guys, how we doing?
Doing good, Harp. I'm here wearing my Devils jersey. First time I've cracked it out for an episode in quite some time, and that's simply because they're just exciting to watch all of a sudden. Highest points per game or goals per game in the month of February. Jack Hughes with the most points in 2022. Don't know if that's a true stat or not. Jesper Bratt scoring at will. This is just a fun team to watch. So here I am in my Devils jersey. How do you like that?
Looking good, and so is Jack Hughes. That was a stat that was true for a bit. Not sure if it still is, but you know, having a fantastic second half to the season, breakout candidate, if you will. But yeah, dude, just I see that you've moved, which is great because now I don't have to look at the weights that you're not using in the background because I was sick of looking at that in your gym / office / whatever. But it is good. It is what it is.
It's the motivation room.
Exactly, the motivation room. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Right now, as you guys can see, I've got a sort of green look going on. I've got my Toronto St. Pat's Mitchell Marner jersey in the background because it is March. We're coming up on St. Patrick's Day, so I thought I'd get into the theme. And, speaking of a weekend about drinking, that just passed. It was Paige's birthday, and oh my God, guys, what a weekend. It was so much fun. Paige is in her mid-20s now officially. She's 25, and we had an absolute blast. Great people, great times, whatever. It was a fantastic weekend. So I'm in a great mood other than the fact that I have a shit ton of work to catch up on this week and, another midterm coming up to be done on Mondays. So a lot to do, but in a good mood, boys.
Congrats, Paige. One of the first to hit the quarter life crisis. Right on. No, I'm kidding. That's great to hear. And let's get into a little fantasy corner. So, Chad, let's go to you and get the roasting of me out of the way.
Man. So Harper and I played last week, and when you look at the standings, he's in 12th place out of 14 right now. And the only two teams that are behind him are guys who don't set their lineups on a regular basis. In fact, the guy in last, Hornytown OnlyFans, has not used his account because he got locked out of it after week 3. So keep that in mind, Harper. Those are the only two guys right now who are below you in the standings. And so that's pretty pathetic, not going to lie. And speaking of pathetic, last week, I absolutely pounded you. It wasn't close. I doubled up your score. And even though you were projected for 137 and you exceeded that by getting 163, I just absolutely crushed you, and it wasn't even close. Still in first place here. The meatheads are never going to catch me again, and I'm just riding this high. And as long as I keep playing teams like Harper, I'm smooth sailing until the playoffs.
Wow, I have nothing to add. Case, do you want to go to you next?
Well, I finished last week with the most points in the entire league, 257. Absolutely destroyed LVB. My team overperformed. His team underperformed. Starting that week, I think we were projected within 3 points. I beat him 257.7 to 179.5 on a little bit of a heater right now. The week before was a pretty big one too. And now I'm playing the Hornytown locked out of my accounts. So it should be another dub here. And trying to claw my way back into a playoff position after, just always taking a beating with the most points against in the entire league and the second most points for. So, I'm pretty excited. A lot of my guys are starting to, really heat it up. Like there's been a few guys that have been mainstays in my lineup that have been good night in, night out. Your JT Millers, your Aho, your Yossi, but holy God, like Braden Point's finally looking like a second round pick, and Jack and Nico are like studs. Jamie Ben's performing. It's working out.
That playoff race is going to be tight because I'm looking at it now. From 7 to 10, like that's anyone's spots, like for number 7 and 8 for the last 2 playoff spots. So it's going to be tight. So best of luck to you.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, fellas, let's get into the meat and potatoes of the episode. So we're going to be revisiting our preseason conference projected standings. So we will start with the Western Conference. And Chad, you mentioned how it's going to be tight for those last couple of playoff spots in the Boys in the Booth Fantasy Hockey League. Well, the same goes for the Western Conference. Really tight playoff race right now, particularly in the Pacific Division. So we're going to take a look at both the Pacific and the Central divisions, look back at our original projected standings, sort of go over where we were right and where we were wrong as well. So let's get into the Pacific Division. I'm just going to list off how we had it at the beginning of the season, and then we can talk about each team for a minute or two. And then last, we will give the actual standings where they are right now. How does that sound, fellas?
Sounds good.
All right, perfect. So with the Pacific at the beginning of the year, we had Vegas in number 1, Edmonton at 2, Vancouver at 3, Calgary in 4th spot, LA at 5, Seattle in 6th, San Jose in 7th, and Anaheim in 8th. So let's start with the Vegas Golden Knights, currently 3rd in the Pacific Division. So, Case, do you want to kick it off talking about Vegas, kind of where we were right and where we were wrong?
Yeah, it was kind of the consensus team. I do want to go back to my own rankings eventually here, if we could do that. But talk about Vegas, we are all consensus have them at number 1. And honestly, it could still end out that way in this season. They've got a few players back healthy. I know Mark Stone's out, but they got Jack Eichel in. So it's like, I'll take that trade, honestly. And kind of a lot of the things that we said about this team have come true in that, their goaltending tandem's worse off with the Vezina winning goalie being gone, but it's still not terrible. They lost some depth, and that is affecting them a little bit. And yeah, I mean, I don't really have much else to say other than we had this team at number 1 mostly because of the division. I think we all kind of agreed that they weren't as good as the year before. We expect them to take a step back, but compared to this division, still saw them a top team for sure.
Yeah, and I think having them first is like fair even now because they've just lost so many man games throughout the season, and we knew they were going to get better as the season went on, as guys get healthy and whatnot, as they got Jack Eichel, etc. But they just haven't had a fully healthy team for a lot of the season, and so like putting them in first, I don't think we can say that was wrong to do in the preseason because I think they're still the best team in this division. I think in terms of like a team that might have surprised us, there are a few here. So maybe we could like start talking about that if you guys are in.
Yeah, definitely. We'll go to the number 2 team that we had there, and that's the Edmonton Oilers. So they're in 4th, battling for a wild card spot right now. They're 2 points behind the Nashville Predators. Let's get into the Oilers a little bit. Case,
I listened back to this episode, and I listened to it on like times 2 speed to rip through, and everything we said about this team was right. Except where we had them in the rankings. We were just ripping on their defense and their ability to keep the puck out of the net. We were ripping on their goaltending tandem, and we were complimentary towards their power play and to the top 6. And I think all of those things have panned out the way we expect them to. And all of the gripes we still have with this team are still problems and not being focused on at all. Like I read the other day that Edmonton's not pursuing a goalie. So I guess they just hate the playoffs and don't want to be in it for very long.
Man, like in terms of having them in second place where we ranked them in the preseason, that I feel like that was a good ranking, especially looking through, the first few weeks or even like the first month or 2 of the season, because they came out of the gate flying. But then some of those problems that you mentioned and that we talked about in the preseason really caught up with them. Their goaltending sucks. Their defense sucks. And like, if they don't have depth scoring, then like, just forget it. So obviously McDavid and Draisaitl have been fantastic this year. But like, what else do they have? You know, so we're hoping that, or Oilers fans, I should say, are hoping that, you know, they kind of figure that out. But if I were an Oilers fan, I'm on board with you, Case. I'd be like, get a goalie. Like, you know, you've needed one for a while now. Get a freaking goalie. So
yeah, like they solved the coaching problem, and I think like they've been a lot better under Jay Woodcroft. I know Jonathan Kiriakou, our good buddy, agrees with that, but there's still another problem there, and that is the goaltending. And you know, Koskinen has stolen some games for them as of late, but you've got Mike Smith, who's, you know, pushing 40, and that tandem isn't going to get it done anymore. And then you've got Stuart Skinner, who is still developing as a young goaltender. So that problem is still there. But yeah, we were very critical of Edmonton before the start of the season, and rightfully so. Then they kind of surprised us out of the gate, right, with that 16-5 start, and then they just fell right off after that. 2-11-2 in 14 games afterwards. And so yeah, it just it's been kind of up and down since then, and I don't think it would surprise any of us if they end up missing the playoffs.
If they miss the playoffs, like, what the hell? Like, that can't happen, right?
No,
like that cannot happen. And if it does happen, like, I think Connor McDavid goes, listen, I've been here for a long ass time. You've done nothing. Like, I'm out. And I know that comes up every year when Edmonton, you know, inevitably doesn't perform or get depth scoring or get goaltending or defense or whatever. And it's just the McDavid and Draisaitl show all year. But come on, I think at this point, if they don't make the playoffs this year, it could be a reality, especially because they're in such a weak division too. Like, you can beat up on some of these teams. Like, anyway.
Yeah, definitely. All right, guys, let's move on to who we had in that third spot. And speaking of Canadian teams, another one, the Vancouver Canucks. They're currently in 6th in the Pacific Division. And wow, it has been a complete turnaround since the start of the season. Bruce Boudreau has come in and has turned the Canucks right around. They may not make the postseason. You know, the math is looking pretty tough, but I mean, they're in the race. And it could happen. They've been a lot better under Boudreau. So thoughts on the Vancouver Canucks?
Well, I'll go ahead and admit that with my original rankings, the two teams I was the furthest off about, you know, I think I did very good in this division. Like, looking back and listening back, I was like, nailed it. Vancouver, I was wrong about. Little biasness there because I liked them a lot, but we liked what they did in the offseason. We saw them make a move in a direction. They said, we want to win this year. We're picking up good players. We got OEL, we got Garland and Dickinson and a handful of players, a lot of moves. So we were excited about it. I think what we didn't expect was Pettersson to be so bad at the beginning of the year, and Besser and a handful of other guys just not really performing. Of course, we expected JT Miller to be the second best player in the NHL, like, obviously. So yeah, like, I was wrong about this team. I'll say that. But if we were looking at these rankings since the beginning of 2022, this team is near the top. They've been so much better, to the point where they're back in that conversation of what direction are they going to go, and they're going to trade 4 players. They're going to do it. And the players on the team are saying, we're sick of the trade talks. Stop. This is our crew. We're going to do it. So I don't know. I'm happy with where they are right now, but definitely missed the mark on their projection.
Yeah, this season right now feels sort of wasted for Vancouver. And, you know, they got their coaching change bump, as all teams do when they get a new coach. You go on a bit of a tear. But this coaching change, that is, seems a bit different in the sense that I think Boudreau is the guy. So, like, they got their guy. And it's just a matter of time, or it was just a matter of time before this team sort of unlocks their potential. And I think Boudreau is the guy to do that. And you're seeing it now. Like, Pettersson's on a tear. I think he's over a point per game since the coaching change. And Besser is stepping up. And JT Miller's been an unreal player all year. And obviously you've got Thatcher Demko, who's one of the best goalies in the NHL. So, like, I think we looked at this team's potential and thought, third sounds really good for this team, especially in, like we've said, a bit of a weaker division. But it is kind of disappointing, how they performed out of the gate. But if we're just looking at this team since the coaching hire, like, I think third seems, reasonable. They're not going to make the playoffs this year. Wasted season. But next year, if we're doing this again, like, I don't know if I would move them, to be honest. I mean, it's a difficult question. Obviously, teams change, but, that's how I stand right now.
Yeah, no, next season, I think that's very fair. Next season, they should be able to take a step and kind of have more consistency and be a better hockey team all year round. I don't think JT Miller is going to get moved. He's a driver for them, as we've mentioned. We're looking at probably a Besser or a Garland. But yeah, since Boudreau took over, it seems like everybody's been better, and they've had a lot more success. So, all right, that's Vancouver down. The Calgary Flames, guys, we had them at number 4, currently number 1 in the Pacific Division. They have been red hot, which seems like for a lifetime now. Let's get into the Calgary Flames.
Yeah, so I said I was wrong about 2 teams in this division. This is the other one. I don't know if I mentioned that, but Calgary was the other team I was wrong about. I had them in 5th. Like that, I just didn't see them. I guess I had a little bit of recency bias with their seasons before. The last 2 is just like I didn't really see this team working out. There's a lot of trouble with the culture in the locker room. There was a lot of talks of who was going to get traded when and where. We thought their off season was more of a trade deadline move than an off season, I guess. And there's a little bit of a consensus that there's a lot of opportunity for bounce back on this team. Like I know I mentioned, I was like, oh, it's time for Markstrom to have a bounce back season. Well, that one I was right about. Yep. The rest of the team, I didn't see them all clicking and coming back on a bounce back year like they have so far this year. And everyone is clicking. That's the thing with this team. Everyone's going and it's working.
Yeah, Johnny Gaudreau was the guy for me that I looked at and I thought, obviously this bounce back is coming, because I think at his very best, he had mid 90 point range. And so, like, I don't know if he's on pace to do that. I think he's even on pace for over 100 points right now. But just like expecting a bounce back season, there's been so much talk about a guy like that, maybe moving, Calgary not extending him, whatever. But I think now, he's proven that he can do it. And like the other thing too was the coaching. Like I know I was pretty critical of the coaching, and I haven't gone back and listened to our Pacific Division rankings, but I remember like thinking that this coaching wasn't going to work because, they needed a guy who was going to play Mangiapane more. They needed a more offensive structure because they have weapons up front. But for whatever reason, this team has bought in, and they've bought in hard, and everything is going right for this team. Markstrom at one point this year had more shutouts than the Canadians had wins, with like 8 or something. And that was like 3 months into the season. Like, it was ridiculous. So this team is firing on all cylinders. I can't remember if I was higher on them going into the year. I might have been on the same page, Case, like being a bit scared off from their past season. And
you had them 5.
Had them 5. Yeah. So it's about what, around the same, but they're a good team. And another team like Vancouver, they kind of unlocked their potential here, and everything's going well for them right now.
Well, Brad Treliving, the GM, kind of said it, and it proved to be true that he felt that this was a group that is really good and just underachieved last season. And boy, is that true. You mentioned Johnny Gaudreau. His career high is 99 points that he had a couple of years ago. He's been excellent. And I know that there are a lot of hockey people out there who really feel that this Hart Trophy race is wide open for the first time in a while. And I don't think Johnny Gaudreau is going to win the Hart Trophy, but his name does come up in that conversation. He's been that good. Another guy is Lindholm. He has been absolutely sensational for the Flames, and for me, should be in the conversation for a Selke Trophy. Like, that guy has been excellent for this team. They look really deep right now. Mangiapane's got 29 goals on the year, a breakout year for him. They are just firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, I checked recently, and Lindholm is 3rd in odds for the Selke right now.
Awesome.
Damn. And he's been great in fantasy too, I'll say that. Mangiapane also came out of the gate. Didn't he have like 18 goals and like 5 assists or something out of the gate? Like, what an incredible player. Gotta love that guy. But
yeah. No, yeah, they've been great. For sure. So yeah, number 1 team in the Pacific right there, the Calgary Flames. The number 2 team, we'll move on to them next, the LA Kings. We had them originally at 5th for our preseason Pacific Division rankings. So let's get into the LA Kings.
Yeah, I had them at 4th. Another self-promoting here. I was pretty high on this team just because I kind of noticed that I think the words I used were in the sexy part of the rebuild, and that they're acquiring players to win games, to show their young guys how to win games. And there was a lot of young players that we were excited to see come into the season. I think we've been pretty right about that. There's a lot of youth on this team and a lot of people stepping up. We were super wrong about Byfield. I think I said he was going to have 30. Harp said was going to have 40, and Chad said 50. Well, I think he's at 3 or something. He's played 14 games. So, there's always things we're going to be wrong about, but I think we were higher on this team than a lot of people were. And I feel pretty good about patting ourselves on the back about that one. A lot of things have been working out for them. A lot of guys have been stepping up into bigger roles and really carrying this team. Drew Doughty's kind of back. Adrian Kempe's in like a whole nother level, and Kopitar's doing his Kopitar thing. They've got a good little 3-way tandem going in net that seems to be winning hockey games, even though the stats aren't necessarily there. So a lot of good going for this team, and it's looking really good on Rob Blake and the accelerated rebuild that's happening here.
Yep.
Definitely. So when they got Danault, first thing, it was like, okay, this is a team now who is signaling that they're on the cusp. They're acquiring players, excuse me, and they're ready to make a push. And like, I think you're right, Case, where, we kind of looked at this team and we were a bit higher on them than a lot of people were because of that, because they addressed a need. They were like, listen, we're going to acquire players, we're going to play our rookies, and they've done both of those things. So I think LA at 5 still makes sense, even though right now they're having a really good year. If I'm LA, like I think I stay put at the deadline, by the way. Like, I don't think I do much. You kind of just ride it out. You're playing with house money at this point if you do make the playoffs, and just, kind of see what happens. But if we're looking at the true like contenders right now, I don't think LA is one of them, even though they're in second place in that Pacific Division. And it was the same with the Ducks earlier in the year, right? Like, the Ducks were overperforming. They were riding a high of Trevor Zegras and Troy Terry having an incredible year, but now they've fallen down to 5th. And so I think it might be the same sort of thing that happens to the Kings in the second half of the season. But so far so good for this rebuild right now.
Yeah.
Well, to go back to our rankings quick before you jump in, Harp, we said that it doesn't matter where we rank these teams near the top, because when it gets to playoffs, this Pacific Division is going to do nothing anyways. So sure, LA is in second. Well, they're probably they're going to be out in the second round at least. So that's kind of what we said, and we'll see what happens. But I'm still not overly high on anyone in this division other than Calgary and Vegas. So
No, I agree. And just sticking with the LA Kings talk for a minute, I think yes, Case, I agree. We were high on them, and they made some good moves to accelerate the rebuild. Danault, as you mentioned, Chad, he's been a great fit. Victor Arvidsson is another guy they brought in who's fit in really well. And I think our concerns were in net and on D, right, guys? And Jonathan Quick and Cal Peterson have been excellent, as you mentioned, Case. But on the back end as well, they've got Doughty and then just a bunch of young D, and they've all played really well, even without Sean Walker for pretty much the entire season. Alex Sedler as well. He's another name that they brought in as sort of that veteran presence. So they've got a really nice mix, and it's been really nice to see them take a step this year.
For sure.
Alrighty, gentlemen, we will continue to move along here. And Case, I know you got a lot to say about this team, and you just want to rip into Chad and I, so don't worry, we'll get to that. It is the Seattle Kraken. So, Chad, I know you and I were a lot higher on the Kraken than Case was. We had them at number 6 in this division. They are in 8th, and honestly, I mean, you could make the case that they should be in 32nd right now in the NHL. It has been a tough first season for the 32nd franchise in the NHL, the Seattle Kraken. Case, fire away.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I wanted to go back and listen to the episode is because I wanted to hear what we had to say about Seattle, because I remember it being the most adamant I've ever been in one of these rankings episodes that I was like, what are you talking about? And basically I had them in 8, and I said they're going to be an absolute dumpster's fire, and you guys had them at, I think, 4 or 5. And I talked about scoring goals. I said this team is all third line players. They're all guys that have been given shots in the past and never really succeeded anyways. So getting an even larger role, it's like I just didn't see it working out for this team because I didn't think they had a great D-core, and I did not think they're going to be able to score goals. And that's been the case. They're 29th in the league for goals per game, 28th for goals against, and their special teams have been absolutely atrocious because they have a power play full of third line players. There's no overly skilled puck dishers on this team, so it just hasn't worked out yet. They're going to get a sick draft pick out of this, and it's kind of the way it's the way an expansion team's supposed to go. They're not supposed to be Vegas and be unreal in their first year with guys blowing up. This is how it's supposed to go. And I think the league is maybe a little, behind closed doors, very happy that it's turning out this way. But like I said, it's goals. They can't score goals, and they're getting scored on a lot.
Yeah, I think the second point is more prominent in my mind. They're getting scored on a lot, and that was the whole kind of reason why I thought Seattle was going to be, not a good playoff team, but sort of on the bubble, like anywhere between 4, 5, 6. I thought they'd be competitive in a shitty division, but that has not been the case. And the problem is, on top of not being able to score a lot of goals, because I recognize that is a thing, and I realized at the start that, I said they're going to score by committee, and that hasn't really happened. I think they got 3 guys right now who are on pace to score between 50 and 60 points, which, that's not nothing. They do have, I would say, a good second line for, those 3 guys. But other than that, it's been atrocious. And the reason that I was a bit higher on them was their goaltending. I thought they'd win a ton of games 2-1, 3-2 type thing, because they had 2 guys last year who were amongst the top in goals saved above expected in the entire NHL. And then this year, both of those guys are towards the very, very bottom of that list. So it's such a random occurrence that their goaltending was so good last season, and by their goaltending I mean these guys on different teams, but that goal saved above expected does account for scoring chances and opportunities and quality of opportunities as well. But now they've just been total dog shit this year, and that's something that I didn't see coming. And I just want to say that was the main reason why Seattle, I was, I guess, high on them, 4, 5, 6, a bubble team, a bit higher than Casey for sure. But so I want to defend my point there. But I do agree, Case, the scoring point, I'll admit, that's, it hasn't happened this year. They haven't scored by committee. They've barely scored at all.
Yeah. And kind of the argument that I like the most that I made, it was near the end, because I just kept wanting to come back to Seattle and tell you guys that they're going to be last in this division. And it was talking about Vegas and how it's a bunch of guys that were never given a shot. There's some skilled players that were never given a shot. Here's your chance, go for it. But then there's guys on Seattle that they've had their chance, and Yarncroc and Eberle and Wenberg and all of them, really. Yeah. They all were given a shot on other teams, didn't really work out, and then they got picked up in Seattle for a second shot, and it still hasn't really worked out. It's a team full of third liners, and they're scoring like a team full of third liners. I would have expected them to play a little more defense, like a team full of third liners, because that's usually your shutdown line, and I mean, it's just not really working out. I know, like, I was pretty high on their goaltending tandem as well. I did almost spit my coffee out when you said that it was the best one in the league. I was
one
like,
of.
I was like, maybe not. You said best in the league, and I was like, they're good, but not that good.
Well,
and then we were both just completely wrong. The tandem has just been god awful.
We were, but listen to this. Last season, in terms of goals saved above expected, which is, I think, the best measure for goaltending in the NHL right now, Philip Grubauer ranked 11th in the entire NHL. Chris Drieger ranked 14th.
So there's two things about goalie stats. One of them is, regardless of how many metrics it is to try to point out above expected, there's still a product of the teams they play on, like in the system that's in front of them. And then the other thing is, it's the most sporadic position in any sport. You cannot predict who's going to be a good goalie every single year because you never know what's going to happen. Like there's some just weird anomalies happening in the season right now. Like Bobrovsky, like he was not good the last 3 years, and he's seeing more danger than most teams, and his team is winning games at will, not only because they're scoring a lot of goals, but because he's playing so well too. So it's like goaltending is just something you can never put that much weight on when you're looking at these teams.
And I've learned my lesson now from Seattle, but I think the general problem with goalie stats is just sample size, because like goalies just play fewer games and you have fewer opportunities to measure what a player is capable of doing on a consistent basis. So to me, like, sample size is the main problem, and that's why maybe I shouldn't have put so much stock into this goaltending, tandem, which I still think, like, if we're talking last year, I think that is the best tandem going into this season if we're looking at stats alone, but it's sample size. So,
and different team. I mean, yeah, I hear you. Like, I hear you when it comes to the advanced analytics of goaltendings, but like, it's a different team. Like, it's just totally drastically different. You can take a high goal scorer and put them on different teams, and it's not going to affect them nearly as much as putting a goaltender on a shitty team when they're used to playing for the top two teams in the league.
Definitely, which is why you use the contextual stats rather than just like straight up goals against average and save percentage, because we know at this point, like, even the casual fan kind of knows that those don't work, and that's why you use the above and below expected stats, which does account for the amount of high danger, medium danger, low danger shots that you see in a typical game, and then bases whether you're saving more or less than what an average goalie would, and so or sorry, what an average goalie is expected to. And so it's like, we shouldn't get into the whole advanced stats conversation. But the point is, I was too high on the goaltending because I relied on the stats, when goaltending, small sample size, and it's mostly voodoo. And we've seen that with like basically every goalie in the league this year, even the two who play for the Maple Leafs, who I'm watching right now. So
I was with you on the goaltending. I thought Grubauer and Drieger, that's a good tandem. But you mentioned sample size, and it was a small sample size for Chris Drieger last year on a very good team in the Florida Panthers, and he was excellent. But that was kind of the question, would he be as good on that bridge deal that Seattle signed him to? And it's been a rough first year, and it's been a rough first year for Grubauer as well, who's on a long-term contract. So things will get better, and they will be able to put a better product on the ice in front of those two. But for this year, it's been a rough go for Seattle. And Chad, you and I were maybe a little higher on them than we should have been. So
I'm going to go back to
pointing that out.
I'm going to go back to my point that I made in the previous episode. I think you guys were just too scared. You were worried about them being good.
I heard that, and you know who said that to me, Case? John. He was like, because I told him of the rankings when they happen, and he was like, you might be a little scared. And I was like, dude, like, that's not the case. Like, I believe in their goaltending. I believe in their depth, even though they don't have the top end scoring. But anyways, we've seen this year that it's blown up. But I'm still of the opinion that if they had average goaltending, league average goaltending, like I said about Pittsburgh last year in the playoffs when Jari was playing absolutely terrible, and now he's one of the best in the league, I said the same thing. It's like if a team gets league average goaltending if they have the depth, they'll be fine. And clearly those two teams are structured completely differently, but I believed in Seattle, and I just don't think, we can truly say how good they would be if they had league average goaltending. It's tough, but
Well, they probably would still be scoring the 29th least amount of goals in the league.
Yeah, and maybe that's the case, but maybe they let in, the third or fourth fewest goals in the NHL, if that's, if the goaltending is true.
Alrighty, let's move on to the San Jose Sharks. And gentlemen, get the confetti out. This was a team that we were spot on with. we were bang on with this team. So we picked them 7th before the season started, and they're currently in 7th right now in the Pacific Division. They are one spot ahead of the Seattle Kraken, who's in 8th, the team that we just talked about. Let's talk about the San Jose Sharks, a team that will be watched, of course, with the negotiations for a contract extension with Tomas Hertl. So let's talk about San Jose.
Well, here's a team that has half of your formula of success, Chad. They have league average goaltending or better, with James Reimer really stepping up, but they just don't have that second piece, and it's the depth of this team. It's kind of exactly how we expected this season to play out for them, other than the fact that they have two guys playing like absolute studs in Meyer and Hertl. So, no surprises here. We had them at 7th for a reason. There's a lot of an aging core, not a lot of depth, and not a lot of goal scoring going on here either.
Yeah, and you mentioned it too with a guy like Timo Meier. I don't think at the start of the year we predicted him to be ranked 14th in our fantasy league this far into the season. This guy is so good. He's having an incredible season, and we just didn't expect that. If I were to go back and listen to what I said about the Sharks, I feel like I would be just upset, because I feel like I just shit on them the entire time, when they have good pieces. They have Meyer and Hertl, who this year have proven that they deserve, some recognition around the league. The problem is, as we know, they've got Brent Burns and Erik Karlsson tying up nearly $20 million on the back end. So
add Mark-Edward Vlasic and his $7 million cap hit in there as well.
So there you go. We know what the problem is with this team, and 7th made sense. Get the confetti out. We picked it. We got one right so far, boys. This is great news.
Yeah, excellent. And I think it just goes to show how wide open this division is, with us getting down to 7th here, and it's the first one we've gotten right. But yeah, this is where we expected San Jose to be. They've got some pieces, but they could really use that number 1 overall pick or a top 3 pick to add another piece for the future. William Eklund's going to be great. He got some experience at the start of the year, and San Jose was actually surprisingly good at the start of the year. If you guys remember, it was holy crap, could they maybe squeak in a weak division where it's really just Vegas and Edmonton? So we thought at the top, could San Jose maybe surprise us and sneak in? But they've kind of fallen back down to earth, and it has been a struggle for quite a while. Another good piece that will get a nice second contract as well is Mario Ferraro on the blue line. We mentioned Karlsson and Burns, and they're aging on the blue line, but they've got Ferraro, who I think is a real good player for them on the back end. So congrats, boys. We were bang on with San Jose.
I wonder with the Sharks, and this is out of left field. I haven't really thought about this, guys, but I wonder about the Sharks if they pull a Minnesota and just buy out a couple massive contracts, just so that they can be competitive, because that Karlsson contract is not going to get any better ever. And Burns you probably keep. I think he's still effective. He's been having a good season, and Karlsson's no slouch either. But I just wonder if they value cap space more than those guys in the immediate, because I know in a couple of years it's going to be costing you. Minnesota, I think, has $12 million against the cap. as early as next season, or it might be the season after because of those buyouts. But I just wonder if they value cap space in the short term, if they think they can make a few deals to turn it around, or because like they have some good pieces. I don't know, just some food for thought.
Well, that was kind of the thought process, I think, in the off season, is that like we could make a couple of moves. Like they brought in Nick Bonino, they brought in Reimer and Aiden Hill, completely revamped the goaltending, which, as we know, was a problem last season with Martin Jones in particular, and they brought in Andrew Cogliano as well. I'm not sure if I mentioned him already, but like they made some moves to basically say like it's kind of a wide open division for like in those bottom spots, and maybe we could squeak in a wild card spot or whatever. But it just hasn't worked out, and this team is definitely looking towards the future. But again, you mentioned Carlson, you mentioned Burns. Those contracts are a problem, but I really can't emphasize enough the Vlasic contract and how that has become a problem as well. And that's $7 million right there. So it'll be interesting to see what San Jose does. But good on us. We got it right. They're in 7th. All right, and we'll move on to the Anaheim Ducks, who were such a surprise at the start of the year. They came out red hot. They, they're still in the race, but their hopes are dwindling for getting into the postseason. They've been so much fun to watch with Trevor Zegras in particular this year, Troy Terry as well. So we had them in 8th, and they are currently in 5th in the Pacific. So let's wrap up this division by talking about the Anaheim Ducks.
Well, I just want to say I had him in 6th, not a big deal, but we did settle on 8th because there was a whole lot of positive trashing of this team going on at the beginning of the season. There's a lot of, wow, it looks really good for the future, guys. But there's a few players here that they're ahead of schedule. They've shown up and they've taken over, and then a couple guys that are playing out of this world that we never expected in like a Troy Terry. That's an unbelievable season. He was in the Rocket race for a little bit. Not so much anymore, but he's still such a great story for this season. And you gotta love where this team's headed right now. That there's a lot of good young pieces. They've got a lot of good culture and a lot of the fan base. Like everyone's gotta love Trevor Zegras right now. I used to not, and I've fully come around on this guy. I think he's a lot of fun for this league, and someone that we definitely need. It's going to be like him and Caulfield and Hughes. It's their league like in the future here, because they're just such personalities compared to everyone else. But like, I don't have much else to say about this team playing wise. Like, I think that they're getting by in a pretty weak division and kind of playing a little bit out of their depth, but in a positive way. So
yeah, another guy who's had a good season, a good bounce back season, because he hasn't been fantastic the last couple of years, is John Gibson. He's had a good year this year, which is, he's always been good. And then a few seasons ago, he was like really good, like one of the best, like top 3 goalie in the NHL. And so he's kind of found that middle ground now where he's just always so good. He's consistent and you can count on him. And so that's another guy who's had a stellar season, definitely contributed to their success as well. But a couple points there, Case. Like, if someone told me that Troy Terry was going to be the best player on this team for the first 3 months of the season, I would have laughed you out of the room. Like what the hell? Where did Terry come from? Like, he just unlocked that, bit of confidence that players just need sometimes, and he was incredible. And then if you would have told me that Zegras and Drysdale were playing like 20 minutes a night carrying this team, I would have been like, no, what the hell? Like, no, we knew that they were going to be good, but Drysdale for me is the one that surprises me the most, because I think Zegras, we kind of knew that he was ready, but Drysdale has been holding his own on the back end as well. So a lot of nice surprises for this team. They're only going to get better in the future. And, we did have them in that 8th spot. That might be a product of me in particular, but maybe a bit of Hart being stubborn as well, putting the Seattle Kraken up there. So might have just been a byproduct of that. But yeah, good things ahead in the future for the Ducks. They're only a point out of the wild card spot right now. They're sitting in 5th in the Pacific behind Edmonton. But if I'm putting my chips on the table and if I'm putting, my faith in a team, it's probably going to be Edmonton over the Ducks. Even though Edmonton has a million problems, I think, I'll pick the 2 best players in the world over, the Ducks any day. So that's my take on them. And guys, I know we were going to do both in the West tonight. Are you guys cool with chopping it up per division? I did not think we would take this long, but so it's been fun. It's been good. And so why don't we cap it at the Pacific Division? And so our next 3 weeks then will be the Central, and then we'll do the Metro, and then the Atlantic to finish off our revisiting episodes of when we did these rankings in the preseason. So is that cool with you guys?
Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
Okie doke.
All right. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.
This has been another episode of Boys in the Booth with Harper Cody, Chad Melbourne, and Casey Abrams. New episodes every Monday on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Connect with the Boys in the Booth on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Boys in the Booth. Visit boysinthebooth.com for show details, and don't forget, you can become a patron of the podcast for just $1 a month at www.patreon.com/boysinthebooth.